Okay, guys. So obviously this week we said that we were gonna start a three-part kind of series kind of thing on the U.S. criminal justice system. So today we're gonna be talking about the structure of the U.S. criminal justice system. So I just wanted to start out by just throwing out some stats and some figures, just so we can kind of begin to understand what we're going to be discussing today. So within America, it's home to, out of the world, 5% of the population, and out of the entire prison population within the entire world, it's home to 25%. So if you just think about that's quite a large population of the entire world's prison population. Then when you think about Black people and African Americans within America's prison, like not within America's population, you've got 6.5% of people who are African Americans, which is a very, very minute amount of people. However, when you look at the prison population within America, it's 40.2%, which is just drastic. It's nearly half. And it just makes you think, why are so many African American people getting locked up? And then we move on to looking at comparing the likelihood or the probability of a white man being arrested compared to a Black man. So it was found that a white man has a 1 in 17 chance of ending up behind bars, while a Black man has a 1 in 3. And I don't know, I just think if you look at it from that perspective, you can see why there's so many issues in this matter. And it just goes back to when the prison system began in the 1800s. And Scylla, I believe you can provide us some more information about that.
Yeah, so the modern day policing sort of began in the 1880s, where that every state in America had a police force. But if you go back a bit, the policing was based in about the 1600s. Policing was very much tied to slavery. So they had two types of sort of police officers, quote unquote, in that time. So they had the slave patrol, who were the people organized in South America who kept tabs on slaves and kept them, stopped and asked them for slave badges to verify who they were, etc. Then they had the slave catchers, who were chased and brought back, like the runaways, who obviously were slaves who had tried to escape the 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 slavery system. So if you compare this to today's society and how it's structured, you can argue that modern day policing is based on slavery, because you see, as Jonathan was saying, harsher policing on Black people. More tabs are kept on Black people. And if this slavery based policing was a way to reinforce and legitimize white people being in control, legitimize them being figures of authority in society, and it's crazy.
Amal?
Building up on what Scylla said, just about how this is why you'll find that more tabs, unfortunately, are being kept on Black people. It just goes without saying, because when we look at how, like, for example, the conviction rates, we see that more often than not, Black people are convicted twice more times likely than their white counterparts, and that's purely down to the way in which the system works. Like what Scylla said, as I said again, like they keep more tabs on Black people than white people. So I think the argument that policing systems in America are based off of slavery are very accurate. And in fact, they are accurate. I think it's a fact rather than an opinion, really.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if we move on to looking at the whole perspective of the structure of the US criminal justice system, it kind of goes back to the Jim Crow laws, which were laws that were introduced to segregate Black people and white people. So these laws caused many Black people to move from areas which had high rates of slavery, such as the South, and move to other areas due to Black people who were educated being put under the radar. People were overlooking them and not giving them the attention or the recognition that the white counterparts were getting.
Yeah.
And this kind of continued, and it happened throughout entire America. It spread like a plague. Like, even though during the 1960s, the Jim Crow laws were essentially eradicated, laws which kind of replicated these Jim Crow laws were introduced, and you saw them throughout all of America. So black people lost their rights in some cases, being able to vote, having to do other things, and having conditions. And this kind of just caused an entire plethora of issues to continue for America and to cause black people to be viewed as degenerates. I don't know if you want to add to that, Silla.
Yeah, so I think that the Jim Crow laws basically gave room for the narrative that black people aren't equal in American society. They're not the same, they shouldn't have the same things as white people. And I think that also explains why, again, black people are policed more heavier, and explains why black people are more likely to get longer sentences, because they should be kept in prison. They shouldn't be part of society. They don't belong in society. And what this does is it means that once, for example, once a black person is arrested, even if it's for a minor crime, even if they don't get sentenced, they will always have that record of being a criminal. And the implications that this has means that they can't vote. There's many cases where they can't vote. They can't get jobs because they have that record. They can't get into top schools because they have that record. So I think that the Jim Crow is sort of, obviously it's not the beginning of the racism, but it's sort of injected like a spiral, like a perpetual cycle of how black people are more disadvantaged in American society. So Ma, what do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely. Like building upon, again, Scylla, what you said about how something like a conviction against yourself, it's not something that, you know, goes away after a year or two, regardless of being released on parole and stuff. It's something that sticks with you forever, basically. So the fact that we said black people are more likely to have those against them and like put under their names means that you've then got a large amount of the population who are black, who then can't go on to do things such as voting, like Scylla said, which then results in that, I guess, the imbalance in. So when it comes to voting, what I'm trying to say is that less black people's voices are being heard and stuff like that. So that's where the inequality comes in as well.
Exactly.
So I feel like in like convicting like more black people than white people for even the same crimes, sometimes it is, whether drug related or not, it then causes like a knock-on effect on other things, such as then the voting systems and the argument as to whether or not these are like equally weighted upon all races and stuff. Which is
Completely agree there,
yeah.
Mark. And that kind of leads into the next stage of what was going on in the US criminal justice system and how the government were trying to obviously criminalize black people as a community and as a group. So obviously in America, the government is built up by either Republicans or Democrats. And at the time that this was going on, there were a number of Republicans who were in power with the government. And if we fast forward a little bit to around the period where Bill Clinton came into power, and there were a number of drug wars going on, which the governments were instigating to make black people seem as if they were animals and just seem degenerate, and to give them the label and to give people the stigma that black people were dangerous and should be avoided. If you just look at that, and you can begin to understand why in 1970 there was about a prison population of 196,441 compared to today, where there's a prison population of 2.3 million. And the thing that's outstanding with that figure is out of the 2.3 million people who are in prison within America, about 80% of those are African Americans. 80%. And this is all because of the 1994 Omnibus Crime Bill, which he introduced, which stated 3 strikes and you're out. If you committed a crime, no matter how minor it was, 3 strikes and you're out. And once you met that 3rd strike, that meant life. So many black people lost their free will, lost their rights for the smallest and most just irrelevant things, like things that anybody could have been doing on the street, anyone could be doing. But when it comes to the color of your skin, it just makes it so much more dangerous.
Exactly.
Scylla?
Which is ironic though, because if we're taking from what we were talking about last week in that, is the justice system fair for everyone? Well then, if we take what Jonathan said, then in that case it's definitely not.
Yeah.
But
and like Yeah, the whole war on drugs thing, it just gave room for them to further go deeper into that narrative that Black people are thugs. All they do is drugs. So it gave, okay, so I think because of the war on drugs thing, it meant that there was harsher policing in predominantly Black communities. And because there's more community policing, that means that they're more likely to get arrested and sentenced because of the fact that they've created this narrative, if that makes any sense. And it's just, they did, I don't think that this is a whole different conversation in itself, but the conviction for drugs, some people, as you said, can even end up in prison for life for drugs.
Mm-hmm.
If you compare that to other crimes and how lightly people get off for other crimes, it's a bit wild, don't you think?
Yeah, completely. Amal?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree, because when you're looking at the volume, first of all, of like who's being convicted, like we've said like numerous times now, like Black people versus white people and the imbalance in the ratios there, you also have to like look closer at the types of crimes as well. You have more often than not that the minor crimes, or I'd like to put them as community crimes, so something like drug possession, for example, something that takes up quite a lot of like police funding and just time for police and court systems. When stuff like rape and murders are happening, it just takes away from the potential of like actual dangerous people in the society, when it seems clear that in the US that the danger to society or societal threat is the Black community, when there's people who are murderers and things who are just roaming freely within society. But we need to look at the bigger picture and actually, I feel like, make most of the white population understand that their Black neighbor is not a threat to society. The threat to society is the people walking freely who are murderers and have thousands of rape victims under their belts, but that's not talked about enough.
Yeah.
So I feel like
Exactly.
the agenda on looking at a group of Black people or a Black person and automatically thinking, right, okay, you know what, this person is definitely linked to crime. They've got the intentions of crime, everything like that. That mindset, I think that mindset needs to be changed completely.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Exactly.
And
it's very detrimental to society as well, because if we want to talk about changing society, policing and everything, it has to start from the perspectives we hold on our Black community.
Yeah.
100%.
And if you just kind of look at the US criminal justice system now and look at how corrupt it is in its nature, but then you look back to the foundation that it was laid upon and how it started with obviously the Ku Klux Klan and them being seen as heroes and Black people being seen as the villains and criminals, then you can completely understand why there are so many Black people within the criminal justice system and why the majority of the prison population is what it is, because Black people have been painted as the villains, as the oppressed, like they're the people oppressing the white people in the criminal justice system's eyes. However, clearly, based on the events that are even happening now but have been happening over the years, that's not true, which just shows why the structure of the criminal justice system is just so disturbing and so corrupt. I mean,
because
you want
to so even if we going beyond slavery as well, there's also economic roots of the prison system, because there's this whole prison industrial complex, which is basically how prisons make profit from having loads of prisoners. So that's why it ties into mass incarceration, because the more people in prison, the more funding you get. And even in America, they have a large amount of private prisons, which is just completely crazy, because the private prisons aren't state run, they're run by companies. So these companies, there's one main one called, I think, Core Civic.
I know that one. That's the one to Rikers Island.
Yes, and they are like the main company that deals with these private prisons. But the thing about private prisons is that they have terrible conditions. They don't, the staffing is really poor, and it's just clear that it's a money making thing, which it is.
Capitalize off of it.
Yeah, that's it. And like, Amma, what would you say about like how that's sort of structured?
Yeah, I mean, well, what you said about how mass incarceration comes about because their main aim get a lot of prisoners put into the prisons, and then with that they can then run off their money stuff, especially when we're talking in the sense of the private prisons. It's easy in the case of America because, like we've said so many times now, black people are more likely to be convicted, so it's easy for them to gather innocent black civilians, place them in the prisons, and then use those as their numbers and figures for mass incarceration. Whereas if they wanted to keep the same energy and do it with white people, they'd struggle heavily on trying to get as many prisoners in there so that they can run this business that is prisons, essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I feel like, guys, with this kind of the discussion we've been having today about the structure and the basis of the US criminal justice system, I feel like it can kind of be linked to relevant issues that are happening today. So if you look at the recent killings or like recent events, so obviously George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, all of these events, they link back directly to the structure of the criminal justice system, because it's a system that's been designed to disadvantage people of color. Like, that's without a doubt. So I feel like, Amal, I know you've got quite a passion for the case of Breonna Taylor. So do you want to go into that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I just feel as though, first of all, what's particularly interesting about her case is that it sort of backfires against people who want to claim that if you're not violent or you don't pose a threat to society, i.e. being black, as the white people like to say, then you should be fine, you'll be off the ropes and police will leave you alone. But why I think her case is so special is because they claimed to have a warrant search in her property, which obviously that's private to her, which in itself is ironic because it, first of all, it breaches the amendment rights and your rights as being no one can come search you in your own property, which is what they did. But it's the fact that they shot her in cold blood whilst she was asleep. So if we take her case, you can't argue and say she was being a threat to society, so therefore she deserved to be killed, because it just goes to show that in America, being black genuinely just does equal you being shot by the police or suffering from police brutality, because Breonna Taylor did not actively go out of her way to, make herself a threat. She literally was just sleeping in her house when police came, broke into her property and just shot her, claiming that they were on the search for someone else, which is just really absurd. And then I think the other thing that makes this case more sad is because they didn't believe that she was part of the what is it called, the EMF group, EMD group. Basically she was one of them. So in a report where her mum was speaking to the news reporters and they claimed she was trying to tell the police officers that she's one of you guys, like she's part of the police force. That's when that they stopped and said, oh right, like they feel bad and the sense of guilt came in. But I think what's wrong and what needs to change is that we shouldn't kill people or not kill people based on if they're within the police force or not, because that means we're just reducing the importance of a human life to whether or not they're a certain color or if they're part of a police force. Like, the point is you shouldn't just kill people unprovoked like that, which again, the fact that the police and justice system is just corrupt in America.
If we just look at how, based on what we've talked about today, because of the way the system is designed and structured, police are always on the defensive with black people. Like, when they see black people, I'm pretty sure 9 times out of 10, their first instinct is to either touch their gun, touch pepper spray, or be on the defense. And even there was an example, I saw this video of a guy who was with his autistic son, I believe. I'm not sure if it was his son or a relative. And they were both on the floor, arms up, regular protocol that you follow when the police tell you to do, put your arms up, don't touch anything. And he was surrendered everything, and the policeman still shot him. And then when he got into hospital, he was interviewed, and he said that when he asked the police officer why he shot him, the guy said he didn't know. He didn't know why he shot him. Just think about that. Is that there's a problem?
Yeah,
they're just shooting for shooting's sake. Yeah.
And so that kind of leads on to current issues that are happening or have been happening lately. So I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but
Yeah.
Do you guys remember the guy who got shot recently?
Oh, I can't remember his name.
I can't remember his name off the top of my head. But if we just look at his situation, the situation which he was in, so obviously, based on the news reports which have been produced, he was in his car at a drive-through in the car park, and
Yeah.
he was under the influence, but he was just sleeping in his car. And from my perspective, that is completely and utterly it's not harmful to anybody. He's by himself. It's harmless.
Exactly.
So, and the police officer just goes to confront him, and bystander protocol, which is understandable, and this is the job of the police, they have to breathalyze him. So they complete the test. They find that he's over the limit, so they proceed to do protocol, and they try and arrest him. But what I don't understand is why they need to, in the first instance, be so aggressive with the arrest. They don't need to do that. If he's being
You're
peaceful
already
with
in a
you, you
state
need to
where
stop that.
if he can't even defend himself as
Exactly.
well.
Yeah. The
And
shooting
then-
was completely unnecessary. It was
Exactly.
not needed at all. It was not needed.
But with that as well, I feel like you could say there's an underlying theme here whereby when police do shoot these unarmed, innocent black civilians, it's just that more often than not you can see they're not actually doing anything. So like you said, he's in his car, not in a sober state of mind. Breonna Taylor in her own house sleeping, etc., etc. Like I could name so many more people who are just doing very ordinary,
mundane things. Yeah.
They don't pose a threat, you know what I'm saying? So
yeah, exactly.
Leading back to what I said earlier a bit, I feel like we need to change the mentality that white people have of seeing a group or just a single black person and automatically thinking
100%.
violent or criminal, you know? It's
I mean, with the case we were just talking about, I can completely understand why he resisted in that instance due to the pure force which was applied. I mean, in the situation that black people are put in when it comes to the police, if you don't resist, more often than not, you die. Because George Floyd didn't resist, he died. Many people have not resisted, they died. I mean, out of pure fear, the guy supposedly stole one of the police officers' tasers. At no point did he harm any of the police. And even if the police thought he was a danger, and apparently it's protocol to shoot in that state, regardless of whether it's protocol to shoot or not, you don't shoot in a man. You don't shoot a man in a vital organ or a place where it's going to kill him. If you're going to shoot him, maybe shoot him in his foot so he can't run from you. But don't kill him. Like the matter of the story is another black man has been killed. Like, and it's due to police brutality once again. And it just comes back again. We can link it back to what we've been talking about today with the structure of the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
In the eyes of police, in the eyes of the government, in the eyes of America in general, black people are a danger. They're a danger to society, they're a nuisance, and they're just plain criminals. And I think we can just kind of all agree on that.
Yeah, and that's definitely what needs to be changed, because I just feel like, Jonathan, just something you just said like a few seconds ago was that whether or not you're restraining, but I feel like any person would want to and have actually the right to restrain, because I'm sorry, if you were searched or, you know, being pressured by a police officer and you know you're full on innocent, not guilty of anything they're trying to accuse you of at the time, anyone should have the supreme right to refuse or restrain. But it's the fact that with a black person you have to have that fear instilled into you that, oh, hang on, pause a minute. If I decide to restrain or not restrain, that could lead to me either not even returning home to my wife and children. Do you know what I'm saying? Whereas with the white man, he doesn't have to think of that. The white people usually weaponize their relationships with the police against black people. So for example, you know, I'm sure you guys know about Amy Cooper and what she did to the black who was walking in Central Park last month.
Yeah. And like even like about the point about how they treat white criminals differently. If you just look at the cases of school shooters, if you look at how they treat them in comparison to black people who aren't actually criminals, it makes you think what's wrong here? Because when you look at Dylan Roof, and I can't remember the other guys' names, they even give them bulletproof vests, right? Bulletproof vests for people who have shot and killed students, harmless people.
It's almost satirical.
Oh, 100%.
It's a slap in the face, because like, do you remember how they treated him? When they took him to his hearing, I'm talking about Dylan Roof here, they reported he requested, was it Burger King or something?
Yeah. And they took him to eat. What?
But
Don't
Jonathan,
dead me
laugh,
more.
but all jokes aside, it's actually just in fact it just represents what America's police system says about people who are being convicted, because with Dylan Roof it was a hard cold fact that he had killed the 9 innocent black churchgoers, whereas you know, you're telling me someone like George Floyd, may God rest his soul, he wasn't even given the right to first of all speak or like just refrain and say, look,
Or to breathe. To breathe.
exactly.
Yeah.
But with Dylan Roof and Jonathan, I know you were laughing. It's funny though, because how can they say, oh my God, you want Burger King, we'll take you Burger King, say less.
Yeah.
Like,
Extra fries and that?
still, yeah, just no. No, but the question is as well, why are you protecting him, giving him a bulletproof vest? Okay, what? So if protesters see him and they want to shoot him, or I don't know, just something like that, why are you giving him then the supreme right to be protected when he didn't care about the lives that he didn't protect or were
exactly.
And then, which brings me to another point. So he could have argued, maybe, I don't care whether it was his mental illnesses, but it was the 9 people, the churchgoers. So in doing that, going to church, what pose like a threat to society did that pose? Do you know what I'm saying? Again, George Floyd, it was, what was it, he was in a grocery store. It was because they suspected that he had forgery, like what was it, a $20 note bill or something like that. Again, it's things that don't even pose a threat to society. So you have to ask yourself, are they like, why are they then allowed to be given like all those like rights to be protected and stuff, like just again giving that bulletproof vest, like why, like
exactly.
you know, it's messed up for real.
Anyway, guys, I think we're coming to the end of the podcast here, and I feel like we've kind of covered everything that we need to when it comes to the structure and why the actual system itself is so corrupt. So I want to thank everybody who's come to watch today and show their support. And I hope that we've educated you to the extent where you feel like you have the confidence maybe to go outside of this Zoom chat and make a difference in the world, because at the moment, the Black community is still crying for help. Even though it's not as prevalent in the news right now, they're still crying for help. So please use this knowledge in a way that you know you can make a difference.
Definitely. Like,
thank you guys.
Knowledge is power as well, so you know.
Yeah. Thank you guys for tuning in.
Thanks guys.
Bless.